Hello, this is Scott again. I told you I might be in the van the next time. I thought it'd just be funny. I've seen a lot of YouTube videos that's been done from a car. First, I want to start out today by telling you a little of a disclaimer. I want to make it plain what's realistic here. First of all, I don't treat medical conditions. I don't diagnose or treat medical conditions. And if you have any thoughts or feelings of hurting yourself or someone else, you simply must get help for that, because there's help out there, and I've seen that be such a benefit so many times. So having this out of the way, I want you to know that I'm not responsible for your actions, and that anything you do, since your circumstances are dependent upon your particular facts, you have to consult your local professionals in that area or field before proceeding. Now, having said that, let me tell you what can be done in some circumstances. I eat at fast food restaurants from time to time, and I think I've pointed out a little bit maybe of why I do that, and that is so that I can talk to people that are, everyday working people, and see what I can do to help them and see how they respond, and they help me a lot that way. Well, at this one particular place I'd stop from time to time. It's a good place to go and just stop in my route or the way that I generally went in business. So once a week or so I'd stop here, make a good pit stop. And I got to know the people there. I got to know one of the fellows on the back line. He was really big into football. There was a woman there, and she's a grandmother raising her grandchild, and that's why she was working there. And there's a young lady there, and I found out that she was going to school to become a nurse, and she's doing a lot of her clinical work already at that time. Well, after, having talked to them a few times each and coming back in, I noticed that to the right of the door, maybe 8 or 10 feet, this woman, a young lady that was studying to be a nurse, that she was smoking a cigarette. I thought, now that's interesting. And just as soon as I looked at her, she knew exactly what I was thinking. And she said, I know, I shouldn't be smoking a cigarette. I've just tried everything. She said, I've tried the gum. I've tried the patch. I tried my boyfriend's patches. That didn't work. I've just tried everything. I reckon I'm just a smoker. I said, really? That's interesting. I said, well, how many cigarettes do you smoke a day? And she said, about a pack. And I said, well, how many's a pack? And she said, 20. I said, so you smoke about 20 cigarettes a day? She said, yeah, about that. So how long does it take you to smoke a cigarette? She said, I don't know, 3 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. I said, so 60 minutes a day you smoke cigarettes, and that's about an hour. And then 23 hours a day you don't smoke. So you're much more of a non-smoker than you really are a smoker. Now, you should have seen the look on her face when I said that, because she thought of herself as a smoker. And when I talked to her about not smoking, the 23 hours a day, it was beginning to change her identity. And so let me tell you about the smoking nurse, the nurse that quit smoking. And she said, yeah, I'd like to hear that. I said, well, it'll take a minute. I said, there was a nurse at this hospital. She's a new nurse, and one of the doctors came up on her, caught her smoking in the hallway near a closet, and she said, oh, no, I know, just like you did. She said, I shouldn't be smoking, being a nurse. She said, you've caught me, don't tell on me. And he just said, well, you're new here. And she said, yes. Says, well, what's your name, Linda? And, well, Linda, I hope to see you around and be glad that you're here and be glad to work with you. And so it went on about a week later that he ran up on Linda again. And he said, Linda, would you like to help me for just a minute? I've got a patient that needs some help. And she said, sure, if I can. And he said, well, just follow me. And so they went over to another floor. And there he said, at the door, he said, now, wait a minute. Now, before you go in here, this man, he smokes, and he's got lung cancer. He's got a tracheotomy, and he can't talk now because of the surgery and the cancer, but he said he can show you what he wants to do by motioning his hands. So if you go in there and just take the oxygen off and help him to smoke so he can smoke. And pretty much shoved Linda in the door and just went on, left that there. And of course, the girl I'm telling this to, her eyes are getting bigger and bigger, And I said, can you imagine what it'd be like to be in a place like that? I said, you work in the hospital. Now see, already I'm helping her redefine her identity as a non-smoker. She doesn't smoke 23 hours a day. She only smokes 1 hour a day. And I'm getting her to put herself into the story. And I said, so then some time goes on, and the doctor sees her again and says, have you got just a minute? Have you been to lunch yet? And she said, no, I've not been to lunch yet. He said, would you like to do me a favor? And she said, well, if it's not like the other favor, that wasn't very pleasant. He said, oh, no, this is not like that at all. Said, there's these 2 children that I'd like for you to take with you to lunch. If you don't mind, take them down to the break room. and break area, the cafeteria. And she said, well, sure. So they went in to this room, and there was a woman there, and she had her 2 children there. And he said, Miss Alexander, he said, if you don't mind, said, Nurse Linda here would be glad to take your children to the cafeteria for lunch, for a little break. And she nodded her head, and so the nurse took the children, and she went on her way and took the children to lunch at the cafeteria. Well, a few days later, they saw each other again, the doctor and Linda, Nurse Linda, the smoking nurse. And she said, well, that was great. She said, those kids were just fun. That's a lot more fun than the last job you had me do. And he laughed. He said, well, yeah, the kids are great. He said, I love kids myself, got a couple of kids myself. And so the nurse said, well, wait a minute. What is wrong with her mother? I don't work on that wing. Said, do you know what's wrong with her? Oh, he said, oh, yes. Said, she's got lung cancer. Said, in a month, those 2 sweet children won't have a mother. And so the nurse that I'm telling, the nurse in training at the restaurant, outside smoking, she's got a cigarette in her hand. Her eyes are getting bigger. And she's putting herself in the story. Now, we're redefining her identity, because people cannot behave in a way that is inconsistent with their identity for any length of time. So that's very important for change. And now she's putting herself into the picture. I said, well, can you imagine, and she's seeing this. She's thinking about this. And so I said, well, then some time passed. And I said, then he saw Nurse Linda again, the same doctor. And he said, Nurse Linda, he said, have you been down to pathology? You're all the time taking all these samples. Said, have you been to pathology yet? And she said, no, I've not been there. He said, well, let's go down to the basement. I'm headed that way. If you've got just a moment. She said, well, I've just finished my rounds. I've got a few minutes before I have to start and taking the vitals again. So I can do that if it's not long. So they go down to pathology, and the doctor goes in. He said, hey, Williams, he said, would you pull up the specimens we talked about, the lung slides, Johnson and McPherson? And he said, sure. So they pull up these lung specimens on a screen, and they're side by side, and one is a healthy lung. It's all pink and healthy looking, and the other one is dark, and it's got holes in it. It looks terrible. And so the nurse looks at this, and she says, ooh, that lung looks terrible. I wouldn't want those lungs. And the doctor said, I wouldn't either. Said, McPherson, he died last night. And so some time passes, and the nurse again sees the doctor, and they meet in the hallway. And the nurse says, I know what you did, and it worked. I couldn't touch a cigarette. I just could not touch a cigarette. I can't smoke anymore. She said, it makes me think about it. It makes me sick even to think about a cigarette. And so she quit. And so I went on, and we talked a little bit more, and I went on. She went off for a break, the nurse in training that was smoking outside the door at the restaurant. Well, I came by about 2 weeks later, and she told me, she said, I can't believe it, but I've quit smoking. I said, you have? She said, yes, I have. And she said, I just can't get past it. Said, it's the story you told me. I identified with that. And so what we did is that we changed her identity, her thought, because we live up to our identity, or we'll live down to our self-identity, our view of ourselves. When we picture ourselves in something, it becomes real to us. And you might say that this was conversational hypnosis. And so there were several things that were working here that we were doing. I got her to think about that. But we changed the meaning also. Now that's very important. Changed the meaning of what cigarette smoking meant to her. Because beforehand, when she first started smoking cigarettes, then cigarette smoking was to be cool, and it was exciting, it was something different to fit in and what have you. And then we changed that to something that was dangerous, that was deadly, and something that was undesirable. And so we changed the meaning of that. Your subconscious will always pick based on what the things mean that it's presented with, what the choices are, the meaning. It's got a lot to do with that. And that's what we did in this. And so she said, I just can't believe it. But she said, I quit smoking. And she said, how did you do that? I said, I didn't do it. You did it. I said, I just brought a few things out to your mind. Now, that's what's possible. And that's why I want you to keep coming back here for more videos. And I'll bring out some visual aids, I guess, next time.